I'm really sorry, but Donald Trump has completely lost it now. He wants to pump $20 trillion into the U.S. economy next year.
$20 trillion. No country's ever done anywhere even near that, like a fraction of that.
This interview blows away everything you've seen from Donald Trump so far. That's almost as much as the entire U.S. money supply that he wants to inject into the market next year. Where is this money supposed to come from? From the printing press, or I have no idea. I'm honestly just absolutely speechless. That would be the biggest money printing spree ever in U.S. history and would send Bitcoin straight to Valhalla. I had actually already recorded the whole video. Then I come home from the beach and see this shocking news. We'll check it out at the very end of the video. But first, let's go over all the other important things that have happened here. One of the most significant Bitcoin short positions is about to be closed. Is that the sign we've been waiting for? Plus, we've got announcements from Deutsche Bank about QE. The money printers are starting up. Fidelity is saying the same thing now. The Fed has already given us similar signals. And we've got a new mega announcement from Donald Trump for the financial markets. There's never been anything like what Donald Trump just announced in the entire history of U.S. finance. Guys, we're going to dive into all of this now. But before we go all in here, let's start by hitting the like button below for higher Bitcoin prices, peace, and decentralization. As a thank you, let me show you the beach again. The sun has already set, and these are just the last rays of light you can see here. Michael Saylor tweeted it again. Just buy Bitcoin and chill, enjoy your life, don't worry. Better times are coming because now we've got a huge signal. As you all probably know, it's not just in the market. There aren't just people who are politically pro-Bitcoin, but also people who are extremely bearish. One of them is Jim Chanos, who you can see here in the picture, and he's especially bearish on MicroStrategy. He just announced that he has closed a short MicroStrategy, long Bitcoin pair position after a compression of the MNAV from 2.5 times to 1.23 times. So basically, he was betting that the overvaluation of MicroStrategy is decreasing more and more, and now he has closed the short position. He says here, no, he doesn't want to squeeze out the last few percentage points because he now thinks that the momentum could possibly turn around again. We always see the effect that the NAVs, meaning the treasury companies, their overvaluations often drop much more sharply when the Bitcoin price falls. Just like here, the Bitcoin price drops, but the stocks drop even more than the Bitcoin price. That could shift now, at least according to Jim Chanos. Chanos, I always say his name wrong. We also have another major Bitcoin short seller whose statements we'll listen to later. He just gave a new interview. Someone who is usually very bearish here, but who has now also changed his view on Bitcoin a bit. And then I also found this assessment here very interesting. Deutsche Bank now expects that the start of QE, meaning government bond purchases by the U.S. Treasury, is expected by Deutsche Bank in the first quarter of 2026. And that's a very bullish sign. We now have different expectations. For example, Bloomberg says, oh, it's getting really dark here, I need to turn around for a second. For example, Bloomberg says we'll see QE in mid-2026. Deutsche Bank says Q1 2026, and then we actually have some more interesting assessments here, namely directly from Fidelity, who say that with last week's rate cut, the Fed's balance sheet reduction, so QT, also comes to an end. The Fed's reverse repo facility is now exhausted, and the U.S. Treasury's cash balance, the TGA, has grown to $1 trillion. That's a considerable reservoir of fiscal, quantitative easing just waiting to be deployed. I'm not sure why the TGA is so high, but I'm sure Treasury Secretary Bissett and company have an explanation for it. And this would mean that we are seeing two forms of QE. So, QE has always been when the central bank originally pumps liquidity into the market, but this time we could see a double QE. On one hand, the central bank injecting liquidity into the market here, and on the other hand, the Treasury injecting liquidity into the market as soon as the U.S. government shutdown is over. That means Fidelity calls it QE through the Treasury. Bloomberg calls it through the Federal Reserve. Then we have Deutsche Bank, which also calls it through the Federal Reserve. We have Ray Dalio, who says this is actually already starting now. They actually need to start now, but that hasn't happened yet. Ray Dalio gives the same take. We heard from the Fed governor of New York, who also says QE is on the agenda here. We have that up our sleeve. So now we have QE predictions from a whole bunch of different sources. And if that happens, it could really push Bitcoin up to another level. But we have to wait for statements from the US Central Bank. The US Central Bank hasn't even given us given a signal as to whether there will even be any rate cuts in the next. I think it's in about 30 days or so that the next rate cut is scheduled. That means if we don't see any rate cuts, then it's also very, very unlikely that QE will come. Normally, rates go down to almost zero first, and then QE starts, unless, of course, the Treasury steps in, which could start much earlier. The Treasury could theoretically begin to introduce infrastructure packages and so on, various forms of cash injections into the market as soon as the government already shutdown is over here. And now let's take a look at Gareth Soloway, who originally used to short Bitcoin very, very often. I think at the moment he doesn't have any open short positions.
So I do think, I can't tell you where it's going to be in 10, 15 years from now, but after a correction that I do think we are close to, and I will go on record and say I do think Bitcoin's going back to at least $75,000 a coin, probably by early 2026. But I do think at some point it goes a lot higher, and then we'll just have to see how the whole world-ending type scenario comes into play with it. But I do think that, again, society is craving an alternative to fiat currencies, and Bitcoin is that answer for now, along with gold, and people are willing to accept it. And as long as people accept it and can access it freely, then that still has a place in the future.
That's a pretty big statement. You see Bitcoin pulling back to $75,000 by 2026?
Yeah, and probably I would say within the first quarter of 2026, even cutting myself even lower here.
You wouldn't see a massive rally on the rate cuts, more liquidity, or then as the market starts to sell off, I guess the correlation has always been, is that what you would see happening?
That's more what I see is the correlation, right? So if we look at 2021, when we had the bear market and then the stock market, we obviously saw Bitcoin falling all the way below 20,000. I don't think it's going to fall as much because you have a much more diversified group of holders, including big players like BlackRock. But I do think, you're talking if the stock market corrects 20 or 30%, Bitcoin likely corrects 30 to 50%. From these levels.
Make up your own mind about which side you're on. He definitely says that in Q1, in other words, not the next quarter, but the one after that, the first quarter of 2026, he expects a sharp correction down to $75,000, and only after that will Bitcoin start to rise again. He says Bitcoin is a solution to the corrupt fiat money system. People are longing for it, but first we're going to see a major correction. And he also says that the Federal Reserve, with its interest rate stimulus and so on, will initially result in a Bitcoin that doesn't take off, lead things in a certain way. So right now, everyone is basically in the camp of, okay, if QE comes, if interest rate cuts come, and so on, we have to see a year-end rally. Quarter one, quarter two next year have to be very, very bullish. But he has a different take here, and I also think it's important, or I find it important, that we let other opinions have their say. I don't necessarily share that opinion. I do believe that all the stimulus and liquidity will, of course, give Bitcoin a boost. But who knows, we'll see. Form your own opinion, and feel free to write me your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know which side you're on here, bullish or bearish. And then we have the next big announcement from Donald Trump. We've never seen anything like this before. President Trump is now announcing 50-year mortgages in the USA. There was once a 30-year mortgage, which was basically introduced by Roosevelt, and now Donald Trump is introducing a 50-year mortgage. And as we all know, the real estate market in the USA is definitely facing some problems. The real estate markets worldwide are having issues because the problem is that people are saving in real estate since money itself is broken. That means they don't want to keep their money in dollars, so they flee into real estate. So what happens then? Real estate prices go up. And then what happens? People can't afford real estate anymore. So what happens then? People take to the streets, people are pissed off, people have had enough, people start to rebel, and now Donald Trump probably wants, at least that's what I assume, to make a statement here and do something about it, or take action against something. But now there's a big, let's say, counter-movement, because a lot of people are saying that these mortgages aren't good for people, but rather they're nothing more than a form of debt slavery that people are being led into. That's exactly what I always say, too. Don't get yourself into some kind of debt trap where you end up having to pay something off for 50 years, and then you have to pass the mortgage on to your children who can't pay it off themselves, and you're just always paying and paying here. You have to work for some bank, for some debt, for some dream that's been planted in your head. Now, listen up. Here's a projection from the Kobrisi letter. For a mortgage of $400,000 at 7% interest. First, a 30-year mortgage means $558,000 in interest over the entire term. If we stretch it out to 50 years, then $500,000 turns into $1.16 million, so over $1 million. $1,116,000 over the entire term. With a 50-year mortgage, you pay double the interest compared to a 30-year mortgage. And now there's a lot of criticism from various politicians here in the US. And that's exactly what's so great about Bitcoin. Bitcoin makes us freer. Bitcoin keeps giving us more and more purchasing power, and these crazy mortgages can really break your neck here. I mean, on the other hand, you could also say, okay, that's just how it is. The increase in the value of the house will outperform this mortgage. And if you maybe have a business and can even write off the interest or something like that, then maybe it's not such a big problem. But the way I see it, I don't think this is a mortgage that's necessarily being given to businesses, but more likely a standard home loan for individuals, not really intended for business purposes. So just for retail or something like that, because often if you have a company, you can usually write off the interest here, meaning you can offset it against the profits you make in the business. But with a normal private mortgage, at least as far as I know, that's not the case. But correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. You always have to weigh both sides. On one hand, the interest costs, and on the other, the potential gains from the property, or of course from Bitcoin, for example. If you have 7% interest costs per year, then it might seem pretty cool if Bitcoin goes up 30, 40, or 50% per year. But let's say the property only goes up 10%, or maybe the property only goes up 5 or 6%, then with a 7% mortgage, your calculations are going to be really tight. And now we actually have a new interview with Donald Trump here. Man, this is so bullish for Bitcoin. If what Donald Trump is saying here actually turns out to be true, then that would be, without a doubt, the wildest and most unprecedented money printing spree ever coming our way.
Investing in America, $20 trillion. No country's ever done anywhere even near that, like a fraction of that. Biden did less than $1 trillion in 4 years. I did 20 trillion. We're going to do over 17 trillion in 8 months. By the time we end, we could do over $20 trillion. There's never in China.
So you heard it, 17 trillion within 8 months. You really have to wrap your head around that. We can take a look later at where all that money is supposed to come from. Or rather, let's listen in a bit more. He also gives some hints about where the money could come from.
No matter where you go, there's never been anything like it. We are building up something that's unbelievable. And a big part of that are the tariffs, because they don't want to have to pay the tariffs, because it's so unsustainable that they come and build the pharmaceuticals and the chips and all the things. They're coming into the United States and they're building them. It's a miracle what's happening. We are building the greatest country in the world, economically, greater than we've ever been before.
This means that what he is suggesting is to inject an amount of money into the economy that is 10 times greater than the entire market cap of Bitcoin. In other words, he wants to introduce $20 trillion, 10 times the value of all Bitcoins combined, into the economy within just a single year. This proposal is truly extraordinary and highlights just how far removed from reality this idea may be. I checked again earlier, and in 2024, the US money supply was just over 20 trillion. By now, it might even be at 23, 24, 25 trillion or something like that. So basically, he wants to pump almost as much as the entire current US money supply back into the market, all within a year. What the hell? You can see it really clearly here, too. Gross domestic product. China's GDP is 19.5 trillion. He wants to pump more than China's entire GDP into the US. Here in Germany, we're at 5 trillion. The entire world economy, the annual product, is 115 trillion. That means he wants to inject almost 1/6 of the entire world economy into the US within a year. Of course, now he says tariffs make the difference, but he can't cover a large part of that just with tariffs either. Pump it into the market. Now, people have already written here, just take a look at this. Where is the money supposed to come from? From aliens or from a gold asteroid, or where is he going to get it from? People are now asking themselves, where is the cash coming from here? A financial injection of $20 trillion would be the biggest economic event in human history. more than the entire US gross domestic product, and all that in a single year. The calculations are not just optimistic, they represent a fundamental reinterpretation of reality itself. The US Federal Reserve would have to print more money than exists in the entire system. That's not a forecast, that's science fiction. That's not entirely true. It's not as much as the total amount of money that exists in the US economy. The numbers that were probably used here are a bit older, because the money supply has increased a little since then. But of course, most of the money would very likely come from the central banks. Donald Trump wants to lower interest rates, he wants to start QE, the Treasury will pump in money, the Fed will pump in money as well. He'll probably soon have a new Fed chair in place who will also go along with him. So, if that's true, then get ready for the ultimate Valhalla bomb. Get ready for something that's never happened before. During the COVID era, I think within a short period, maybe 2 years, the money supply in the US increased by about a third, if I remember correctly. And now they would basically multiply this game again, much, make it even crazier. And what did we see back then when the money supply exploded like that? Bitcoin to the moon. What's going to happen now? Bitcoin is probably going to the moon. But I still have my doubts whether that's really true or if Donald Trump is just, I don't know, maybe he knocks back a few beers now and then or something, who knows? Did he just have an especially good day today? I don't know. Yeah, fascinating, guys. Comment below. To buy Bitcoin, I'll link 21 Bitcoin. Use code COLBITCONDT to save up to 20% on fees. Peace out.